In a recent debate, I mentioned the story of this absolute loser in Belgium that went to Rwanda and suddenly, despite him never holding a proper job in Belgium and living in his mother's basement basically for all of his life, the moment he went to Africa and arrived in Rwanda, he was suddenly seen as this massively competent man. He was pushed into the highest offices in the country, and then he played an instrumental role, and probably the most instrumental role, in propagating and starting the Rwandan genocide. How did this happen? Well, this is the story of Georges Reggio, the small town Belgian boy who transformed from a nobody into the leading instigator of the Rwandan genocide. An unemployed white man, quite a nobody from a small town living in his parents' basement, ended up igniting the deadliest genocide of our lifetime. Georges Reggio was an ordinary social worker in Wallonia with no background in politics, no ties to Africa, and no ambition beyond getting through the week. Yet, within a matter of months, this same man was living in Kigali and becoming one of the leading instigators of a genocide that led to the slaughter of over 1 million people in Africa. Georges Henry Yvon Reggio was born in the sleepy town of Viviers, Belgium in 1957. His mother taught at the local school. His father was a firefighter. The youngest of 4 children, Georges grew up quiet, mild-mannered, and very unremarkable. A man destined, it seems, to live a much ordinary life and die basically unnoticed. He spent nearly a quarter of a century in his parents' house, shuffling between odd jobs, never being able to hold one single job. First, he was a counselor for drug addicts. Later, he was a teacher for mentally handicapped children. There was no hint that this man, soft-spoken and socially adrift, would one day lend his voice to one of the bloodiest massacres of the 20th century. In 1992, lonely and restless, Reggio moved to Liege, where he fell in with a group of Rwandan Hutu expatriates. They welcomed him warmly, something his own people rarely ever had done to this guy that they saw as a loser. That same year, he traveled to Rwanda for the first time in his life outside of Europe to attend a friend's wedding. It was there, amid the green hills of Kigali, that Reggio's fascination turned into an obsession with this little African country. In today's video, I will convey the unlikely story of how this nobody from the small town of Wallonia had transformed himself within a matter of months into the leading propagandist calling for the Rwandan genocide that happened on his watch. Georges Reggio's mother was ethnically Walloon, and his father was an ethnic Italian, who, as we mentioned, was a fireman. Both his childhood and his early adult life were terribly unimpressive. He had been unemployed for most of the time before he finally found work, his first job as the counselor that we mentioned for the young drug addicts, and then as a teacher for the mentally handicapped children. But between these jobs, he also spent many years being unemployed, often not being able to keep his job as a teacher for the mentally handicapped children. He spent many more months unemployed. He spent the first 24 years of his life in his hometown, living in his parents' house, and never even thought of moving out of his family home. Then in 1992, after being unemployed for quite a few months, he finally moved to the city of Liege, where he commuted to Brussels to work in a social security office. His colleagues from the time vaguely remembered him later as a quiet, soft-spoken young man who just went along, wasn't terribly good at his job, but simply minded his own business throughout the day. It was here in Liege that Reggio, who struggled to connect with his own native Belgian peers, got involved with a Rwandan Hutu expat community after he felt kind of pushed out by his Belgian peers. In August of 1992, he then also traveled to Rwanda for the very first time to attend a wedding of one of his new Rwandan friends. It was during this visit that his Hutu friends convinced him to embrace a very ardent communist and also very ardent anti-Tutsi position, even embracing a type of Hutu supremacy power ideology based on a view of ethnic supremacy. Riju began to view the Hutu people as superior, not only to the Tutsis, but also as superior to the Europeans that he grew up with, especially his own Wallonian people. Driven in parts by an oikophobic alienation from his own people that always had bullied him since his school days, and a xenophilia for the Hutu people that embraced him when his own people didn't want anything to do with him, he became increasingly involved with Rwandan political actors and diplomats throughout 1993. He was reportedly seen with officials of the then Rwandan president Juvenal Habyarimana and his political party, and by the end of 1993 he quit his job and permanently moved to Rwanda to become a consultant for the Rwandan government. Wow, this guy who never really had any skilled job in his entire life would now be a consultant to an entire country's government. He was specifically recruited by the Hutu political elites to become part of their Department of Propaganda, which is somewhat surprising in light of the fact that he had absolutely no experience whatsoever in media or broadcasting or journalism, and moreover, he didn't even speak Kinyarwanda, the native language of both the Hutu and Tutsi peoples. However, the Hutu political class at the time, especially under President Juvenal, was largely Francophone, trained in Belgian-style education, reading French newspapers, and working in a Francophone bureaucracy. By contrast, the Tutsi elites, many of whom had been educated in Uganda and Tanzania and even South Africa, spoke English as a second language instead of French. As such, this linguistic divide based on second language rather than native language of Francophone Hutus and Anglophone Tutsis in exile became an important geopolitical fault line, which is exactly why a French-speaking broadcaster from Wallonia had such value to the Hutus at the time. By the end of 1993, Riju settled in Kigali, Rwanda's capital. His status as a white foreigner in the Kinyarwanda language known as Muzungu was apparently leveraged in Kigali. And the fact that he spoke native French gave him a certain novelty and credibility above other Hutus of the time among parts of the Hutu elite. He was given a prominent position immediately as the producer and broadcaster of the government-backed radio Télévision Libre des Mille Collines, which in English translates to the free radio and television of the Thousand Hills. He immediately started to produce anti-Tutsi propaganda, and his segments included classical music intros, something the Hutus would see as something very high society, and then Machiavellian quotes and appellations of the Tutsi as cockroaches, aimed at provoking hatred and violence against this other group in Rwanda. His role was less about grassroots outreach, since of course he didn't speak any native language, and more about legitimizing the Hutu power ideology among the elites and military circles, who of course all spoke French.
Dimanche 19 juin 1994 et il est 16h22 à Kigali dans le blindé de la SNM. Avis à tous les Inyembi qui nous écoutent, oui, à tous les Inyembi qui nous écoutent, le Rwanda appartient à ceux qui le défendent vraiment. Et vous les Inyembi, vous n'êtes pas des Rwandais.
In his programs, Riju described Tutsis as enemies and cockroaches that need to be exterminated the way one would exterminate a pest, Even during the genocide itself, in which over 1 million people were brutally slaughtered on the streets, he even continued to use the airwaves to justify the massacres as acts of national survival. Riju's broadcast also specifically referenced the racial characteristics of the Tutsis as a means of inciting genocide. In one of the broadcasts that would later be used in his trial for genocide, he stated, and I quote, "Look at their height and their physical appearance. Look at their small nose and break it. While both the Hutu and Tutsi are black Africans, the Tutsi also have an Asiatic element to their genetics that scholars have found to be completely absent in the Hutus. And this contributed to the differences in physical appearances amplified by Riju in his propaganda for the Rwandan genocide." After the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Tutsis returning from exile in Uganda, regained control of Kigali in July 1994, RTLM was shut down and its staff were forced to flee. Riju himself escaped through Zaire, today known as the Democratic Republic of Congo, along with retreating government officials and militias who were friends of his. For a time he lived in Kenya, but then he resurfaced in Belgium, where he intended to just go on with his life as if nothing happened there back in Africa. But then, journalists began investigating him after survivors identified his voice on the seized RTLM tapes. He was consequently later arrested in Belgium 3 years after the genocide had ended, in the city of Liege again under a UN warrant. And in the year 2000, he pleaded guilty to direct and public incitement to the Rwandan genocide and crimes against humanity. He was consequently sentenced 12 years imprisonment in Rwanda, becoming the only European to be convicted for participation in this genocide. After being released in 2009, he has continued to live a quiet life in Italy with no intention of ever returning to Rwanda. And so a young Wallonian man who had lived in his parents' basement, who amounted to absolutely nothing in his young adult life, in the most unlikely fashion imaginable, became not only a Hutu supremacist, but a central figure in instigating the Rwandan genocide. The ethnic animosity amplified during the Rwandan genocide is not unique, however. Check out our recent video where we analyze all the nuances related to the US President Donald Trump's claim regarding white genocide in South Africa. Simply click on this link appearing on your screen right now. And remember to become a member of the Willem Petscher Group. It is only through your contributions that we are able to pay our staff salaries to continue to produce these videos. Just follow the steps on the banner underneath me. Goodbye and God bless.